Hi, everybody. Well, the first thing to say is I don't know is the answer. That's me there on the right, looking extremely grumpy about the whole idea. Thanks to Axel Scheffler for that. Pam mentioned that somebody alluded this morning while I was stuck on a stationary train to the idea that drawing research is perhaps sometimes seen as the poor relation to the art world in general. Well, I think perhaps it's in terms of drawing for illustration, it's seen as the poor relation of the poor relation. It occurred to me to add this subtitle, words about pictures, pictures about words, pictures about pictures, because of course, coming from the field of illustration as we do, pictures and words are a big part of what we do. But I'm thinking about writing about images and drawing, pictures that illustrate words, and pictures about pictures as the language of drawing. And I do think of it as a language, and I suppose my presentation, a short presentation, is really in the form of a kind of late career plea to the world of drawing research to resist the temptation to try to decode drawing into words all of the time, because as I say, I do think of drawing as a language. And I don't normally give papers at conferences, I have to say, but we were, all of us, my colleagues and I, looking at communication from Drawing Research Network and discussing it. And I just have to say, I found it very difficult to understand these words about drawing. I know that because I come from I'm a child of the old autonomous art school where making was absolutely key and the world of research wasn't part of it. This to me is something of a mystery. John Ruskin, Anglia Ruskin University, where Cambridge School of Art is now. He founded the school and gave the opening address in 1858. And one of his terms that I still feel is really relevant to us, and drawing has always been a big part of Cambridge School of Art, which unusually is kind of rooted in illustration historically. But this particularly resonated with me from the elements of drawing. And I would rather teach drawing that my pupils will learn to love nature than teach the looking at nature that they may learn to draw. And I take that as meaning that he would rather teach them to see and understand than to learn the skills of purely the skills of passive drawing. One of our other, one of our illustrious alumni, Ronald Searle, who studied at the art school just before the outbreak of war and famously spent the next 4 years in a prisoner of war camp in Singapore, drawing non-stop, despite the fact that he was suffering with cholera and all sorts. But when we had our 150th anniversary in 2008, he sent us this drawing, and of course, Ruskin has always been very easy to parody. And Ronald's version was that Cruikshank and Rowlandson were in the background looking in dismay at Ruskin droning on about drawing. So I suppose I am what's called an accidental researcher. It's not something that I have ever seen as a deliberate or conscious part of what I do, but I write books about drawing and illustration for my publisher Thames and Hudson. But for me, I write books about drawing and illustration because it comes from being a practitioner. So for me, the research is the drawing, the practice. But of course, writing books plays well with university research for the REF. and impact case studies, and that all goes down well, but that makes me feel very guilty because for me, as I say, the research is in the drawing. Available in all good bookshops, by the way, just published. But I'm interested in the process and the practice behind the drawing. So this is always the painful bit, showing examples of my own practice, if I can call it that. I worked as an illustrator for about 20 odd years, just as an illustrator before gradually doing a bit of part-time teaching and then eventually full-time teaching. But I would say that my own drawing, which is mostly from observation, from pure observation, is driven by an interest in the anecdotal. In the life drawing class, I always find myself more interested in the drawers than the model. So this is a 2-hour drawing, and of course people move about, so it's a sort of a synthesis of that period of time. I have sketchbooks full of hundreds of these drawings, I have to say. Anecdotal drawing, people, but also places and atmosphere that matter to me. These are all things that underpin illustration work, all drawn very, very much directly from observation. People in places coming together. Again, another drawing, a couple of hours in a book fair, watching people move about and trying to make sense of the human figure going about their business without realizing they're being drawn. So all of that personal practice underpins, as I say, what the university calls research and what I would call writing books about stuff I like. And yeah, if I'm examining the work of Mucha or whatever, when I'm writing about illustration, for me, I have to see the skeleton, the bones of drawing that underpin it. And in my most recent book about sketchbooks, I selected a range of artists, past and present, to look at the very different ways that they use sketchbooks, whether it be for observation, or in this case, Brian Wildsmith, the great illustrator of the 1950s and 60s, planning, sequence, and structure. I do also supervise PhDs, which I've been doing for nearly 20 years now. I think I've had 15 successful PhD students. But I'm only interested in supervising PhDs with very high-level practitioners who are using their practice, again, as the tool for inquiry. This is Beatrice Lostale-Seju, a current student who is researching the potential for creative expression within non-fiction children's picture books. She also does a lot of work for the V&A Museum. This is Dr. Becky Palmer, who has been teaching with us for some time and has moved to the University of Worcester now, whose research was all about relationship between graphic novels and picture books. And she's a much published graphic novelist herself. I would never call myself a scholar, a proper scholar, but these are the books that really, really matter to me, talking about this subject of what we now call research and the importance of drawing. Richard Carleen, that book, top right, I thoroughly recommend that book. It was written in the 1960s, quite hard to find a copy. Carleen was the brother of the Carleen who married Stanley Spencer. Can't remember her first name now. He was also an examiner for schools, for art in schools. One of the things that stuck with me was this comment: today in many art schools, the student studies philosophy or history as part of the course for the DIP-AD, as it was before the BA. But where do we find students of philosophy, language, history, or science required to know anything about art? Bruce Archer, many of you will know his work as Professor of Design Research at the Royal College of Art for many, many years. Another one, this paper, Design as a Discipline, Design Studies. Wonderful piece of writing ahead of its time. And he claimed to have an aunt who had her own version of the 3 R's. You know, he said the idea of the original 3 R's is ludicrous, really, as the basics of education, because reading and writing are 2 sides of the same skill, literacy. Arithmetic is numeracy. Well, this fictional aunt said it should be reading and writing, reckoning and figuring, numeracy, rorting and writing. By rorting, she meant knowing how things are brought about, which we might now call technology. By writing, she meant knowing how to do it, which we would now call craftsmanship. We might also call those things, in modern terminology, tacit knowledge. So it's a plea for from an old person for a little return to the world of making and the world of School of Art. At which point, thanks to Edward Ardizoni, that's the end of me, but not the end of the talk, because I shall hand over to Pam, who will pick up on the rorting and writing.
Yep, so rorting and writing. These are just a few of the, I'm starting at the end and working backwards, a few of the published work that I have, just so you can see the end result of what I'm about to talk about. This came out last week, one image in there. Money goes to UNHCR. If you're buying a Christmas present, now's a good time to get it. Graphic novel Thornhill, which is what I'm going to be talking about, and The Hideaway, which both Thornhill has her themes about bullying, Hideaway has themes of domestic violence, and were circulated to schools around Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And both are published internationally, and they're both Gothic ghost stories. But that's enough. So this is a drawing that I made as a student at art school at Cambridge School of Art. Early forerunner of my love of tonal drawing. But I think it emphasizes the fact that all of my education has been deeply embedded in observational drawing, and that's fundamental to my practice. It was also something that was drummed into us. Martin's already mentioned Ronald Searle, and that we still teach students at Cambridge School of Art that students should not move, eat, drink, or sleep without a sketchbook in the hand. So it should become as natural as breathing. We use this quote, we start all our students with this philosophy. And so this is just some examples of how observational drawing is absolutely key to what I'm doing. I would be looking at the human figure, in this case, a whole indoor market of very, very strong women in Porto, in Portugal. But just spending a morning drawing these women who are entirely embedded in their market stalls, individual market stalls, working incredibly hard, coming and going in and out of scenes. And that sense of people watching and love of interest, massive interest in posture and how it can convey confidence or a sense of emotion. And of course, when you do draw a lot from observation, then it's feeding the imagination. So when it comes to doing imaginative work, I would be inventing character based on what I've learned through drawing the human figure from observation. So I'll be inventing, in this case, this chap for a book called The Brock Inspector. And in my mind, I'm playing him like somebody I can see, but I'm manipulating his height, his weight, his posture, until I get the character how I want him to be. So that sense of using drawing as a way of navigating and negotiating what I'm seeing imaginatively, responding to a text, is helpful when it comes to wrangling a novel. And I'm showing the work I did for Thornhill as an example of the roles, the multiple roles that drawing has played in getting that publication to, or bring it to life, if you like. The initial inspiration for the book itself came when I was in a bit of a creative dry patch, had absolutely no ideas whatsoever, but luckily was out walking with my dog and saw this house in Cambridge that was boarded up. I had boarded windows on the inside. It was going to be renovated. There were keep out signs. And I really, really wanted to go in and see what else was there. I really wanted to know what it was I couldn't see. I couldn't get in. So on the way home, I thought about all those books that I really love about those houses where stuff happens. Jane Eyre, Secret Garden, Rebecca. And by the time I'd walked home, I made that sketch on the spot. I had a sketchbook with me, made that drawing on the spot, thought about it on the way home. And by the time I got home, I had the idea for the novel, 2 girls, 2 stories, 2 times, 2 places. And I thought, what's the opposite of a Gothic house that you can't, with a mystery? It's got to be the thing that I see every single day, the view out of my bathroom window when I'm having a shower. So I stood in the bath and I drew this. And that gave me 2 environments in which to set the story. So then going back to the sketchbook and experimenting with print and how I could possibly base something, use the imagination to grow something that I had seen from imagination into how it finally ended up in the book. That's the painting that it was cropped in the book. I thought I had created a Gothic masterpiece, but somebody on Twitter pointed out it looks like a house with its hands up. Which now I know it, I can never unsee it. I'm no longer on Twitter. But in my sketchbooks, to develop the whole of the novel, I would be using sketchbooks to talk to myself, to work things out, to say, how does the architecture work? How would a character navigate the space? Storyboarding, writing lists to myself, further storyboarding, just working out exactly how something that was playing as a story in my head could come to life on the page. Of course, as part of writing a novel, you're navigating, you're working with a publisher. You're having to take that, all of these drawings that mean a huge amount to me, they all make perfect sense, but you're having to take them to an editorial team. So at the point where I turned up to a meeting with a stack of drawings like this, and the publisher says, but Pam, what is it? And I said, well, obviously this is the character Ella in the Secret Garden, where the doorway has the ghost girl, the spooky girl lurking behind. And they said, Pam, you've got to step it up. We can't read it. The kind of conversations I have with my students all the time. If you want us to understand what's going on, you need to make it clear. But of course, in terms of drawing is a way of speaking to myself, of talking to myself, free hands, working out what's happening. But of course, drawing is a part of talking to somebody else. So these were the kind of very tight drawings that I ended up taking Wodges off to those editorial meetings, which I then get feedback on. So I can then make notes on what they think about it, and it becomes a drawing, becomes something that I'm negotiating with a team of other people. As part of working on the book, it's a ghost story, or it's sometimes categorized as horror. I bought old dolls, and my daughter at the time and I broke them apart and poked their eyes out and cut off their hair and all the things you're not supposed to do. I drew the dolls. These never featured in the book. So it wasn't part of the illustrations. It was just part of the process of finding a way in for myself, finding a sense of atmosphere. I did make some bad dolls, so I knew how to do it, so I could illustrate it. I also knew I had to have Thornhill, the house, as a character. So I went to a private school in Cambridge, which had very fine architecture, and I did very, very tight, precise drawings so that I could study the architecture and I could work out how stonework looked and how windows worked and how much stone there is around a wooden door. Things I hadn't looked at closely enough before. These are not drawings for anybody else to see. They are just for me to gain understanding and insight. I hadn't done precise technical drawing since I was 13 at school, but it did help me. This combination of planning of observation meant I could make Thornhill the house and the other environment that was in the school, in the house. And so I spent a lot of time, so I ended up with this in the studio, this, dolls, puppets. But I didn't know what the inside of the house was like. I'd never been. I couldn't imagine it. So I went to this abandoned pub on the A505 towards Baldock, should you ever be going that way. I drew it from the side, from the back, and I went inside and I was so scared. I couldn't draw in there. It was so dangerous, but I wrote a list in my sketchbook. And the experience of having been there was able to fuel the imagination. So this is how the book works. It's diary sequence, black pages, wordless sequence of illustration. Black page, diary sequence. So one story, what the visual sequence is one person's thread, the diary entry is another person's thread. And this is how the whole novel works. So I suppose in relation to that writing and writing, I've just listed some of the ways that drawing can be adapted and manipulated in the process of creating something, and how, as far as I'm concerned, I don't have to write about that process for that to be my research. Those sketchbooks that aren't for to be seen by anyone else, they're not part of that process, except for those publishers seeing those rough drawings. All of it is just for me to work things out. And this was the list of ways that I think drawing performed separate roles for me in the creation of that one book. Observational drawing to inspire the book in the first place, to understand structure, observational drawing as information gathering. I mapped imaginary spaces, I evolved imaginary spaces, I evolved character, I developed sequence, I explore composition, I talk to myself through drawing. I used drawings to talk to the editor and the publisher. I used it as part of editing a narrative. I did a measure drawing for model making, and of course, drawing is there evident in the final artwork. So I suppose that's just a way of supporting what Martin is saying in terms of how research can be used, how drawing can be used as a research tool in a practical sense. Thank you. That's it.